Good afternoon, and thank you for helping us round out this great first day of the IFAH conference today. My name is Dr. Teresa Seick. I'll be guiding us through the discussion this afternoon. I'm joined on stage by a panel of experts that will share their expertise and experience with you as it relates to digital health and the FDA and challenges that the FDA faces. So, the focus of today's conversation, and most certainly write your questions down and ask the expert panel when we're done, is really to talk about what the FDA is doing today and keeping up with digital health, the different formats of digital health that are out there, the benefits of digital health, and really try to weigh in on what our experts here feel is happening in this market. We are limited a little bit on time because we ran over, so we're going to run through some of these things fairly quickly, but most certainly ask your questions at the end. So the FDA, I think we all would agree, plays a vital role in managing digital health or this space today. We think that they have to be very flexible when it comes to regulating this space because it is so fluid. Things in technology are changing so fast that we need to make sure that the regulations that are set forth by the FDA are very flexible. So the approach that the FDA has taken really is to make sure that all Americans have timely access to high quality, safe, and effective digital health, to create some energy around this topic and to guide the regulations around it. So the FDA formed a plan. It's called the Digital Health Innovation Plan to help guide all of us through this process. I think we would all agree that there are really no real experts in this space yet. The FDA has pointed that out when they looked at, really with their new plan to help regulate what's going on in the digital health space, the three topics that they would need to focus on as it relates to regulation. One was issuing guidance, so making sure there was clarity on medical software, making sure that they were able to launch a pilot for a pre-certification process, work with some of the companies out there directly to try to develop a new approach, and then to build a very strong bench of experts. So I don't think any of us up here today will say that we're FDA experts, but most certainly we understand the digital health space, and we'll share some of our experiences with you today. If you want a source to go to, most certainly go to the FDA.gov website. There's a lot of really good information there on what the FDA is currently doing as far as oversight of digital health. So within the FDA's program focus, really what they've done is they've kind of named some things that they're going to focus on and things that they're not going to focus on. Oversight on medical apps. Those that present higher risk and those that present lower risk, most certainly they're not going to focus on the lower risk apps. They don't really want to focus a lot of their time on technologies that receive, transmit, or store or display as far as a medical device goes, or devices that only promote wellness. They do want to clarify all the expectations for cybersecurity and IT software. Many of you use EHRs. So let me kind of propose some questions to the panel, kind of get some of their insight, input, and then we'll kind of get some conversations going here and share some expertise. So I will open it up to the panel for one of you to respond. Does software as a medical device and or medical devices that collect, transmit, and store data add clinical and economic value, and what is their risk to the patient population? Do we really need FDA oversight?
Hi, my name is Ralph Donaldson with Wise Think Health Solutions. To answer your question, I do think we do need FDA oversight. I do think it is important. I think just recently, if you're following this trend of work with the FDA, there was a situation where two software companies were both working and doing the right things, but by a patient not knowing how to use these different products, use the products, and they had an event with their diabetic care. But individually, both software companies met the FDA's oversight guidance in terms of not requiring FDA approval. And so where we have to be careful, especially as IT developers, we got to be careful to understand that we are dealing with someone's health, and we have to be very mindful that the information we're sharing people are using that to engage in their health and do things. So the FDA should have a role. I think they may want to spend more time getting their expertise up to keep up with the pace of innovation and change, but I do think they should have a role.
Thank you. So that being said, how secure and safe is software as a medical device?
No worries. So in terms of software as a medical device, there are safety opportunities. Can be safe. So because we've had some accidents in the market doesn't mean that we throw everything out. There's a lot of good products that do work and can be relied on. You'll see new products coming to the market from Apple as well as other wearable companies that are trying to converge into this space around mobile health and wearables and getting into the healthcare spectrum. So there are devices out there that you can rely on, but there's also devices that you have to be a little bit more skeptical of. And I think it's a person-by-person situation, but I wouldn't think that we should not rely on software as a medical device. If you think about the glucometers, if you think about blood pressure cuffs, scales, all of those things have software in them somewhere or firmware somewhere. And they've been very reliable to us as to use it for our health. So I wouldn't throw it all out. I just want to put an air of caution around innovation where we may be doing development very quickly and not having the right medical guidance to do it and put something in the market that may hurt versus help.
Right, thank you.
Real quick, I'm going to chime in there as well.
Go ahead.
I think this is actually an interesting question because when it comes to safety, security, privacy for patients, we have to look at, we need to make two distinctions, right? Small SAMD, small wearable medical devices, and then you have your larger devices. So it's your wellness and maintenance care versus now more specialty wearables, and then long-term comorbidity devices that the biotech industry is now expanding on. So for our first category where it's wearables, looking at maintenance care, right? The FDA is basically saying we don't need to be, we're not going to be too hands-on on them, right? We're not going to look at too much in terms of placing certain regulations and affairs over them. And by all means, that's a fair assessment. I think where we can expand that actually is if we look at the global healthcare systems. And now we start to look at, in the UK, the CQC, and where they're saying now these wellness care devices, we need to start putting a stronger regulation on. And there are these two distinct pools of thought. I think that's a question that's really up for grabs of whether we think we need to regulate that in terms of security, privacy standards for patients. Because again, how many people here have wearables, an Apple Watch? How many people use glucometers? Simple things like that. Where I do think the standard is congruent between, just on a global scale, is when we start to look at, again, the more complicated the biotechs coming out saying we're going to have a lot of these digital healthcare devices. And that's where regulation does need to come out. There's a lot of patient information that's coming out of these apps that is being stored, and there's not quite a fair standard when we look at the global healthcare system of what needs to be regulated, what doesn't need to be regulated. And that actually opens up a lot of small businesses to circumvention plans where they can circumvent the FDA, start to generate large revenue models, and now they're profiting largely and just providing direct-to-consumer devices out to the public. And that's something that the FDA doesn't have much recourse on. So I think that's the place where we can really stricken up what the rules are, set some regulations, and protect patient privacy, start to dictate certain standards, and move forward for digital health.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds to me like there's a lot of opportunity for small businesses in a very fluid space. There's a lot of opportunities that have been created. So will the FDA streamline that process so that software and data collecting devices can get approved quicker and through a process whereby the developers can be approved quicker so that when they submit for approval to the FDA, that it goes much faster? Do you think that that's going to be something the FDA really, trends toward? And will that add value if we can kind of speed up the process?
Yes, Damien from Pocket Rehab. I think, with where we're going, we have the ability to reach the masses and collect so much data, so much great data from all of this, and it's great. But another great factor with the technology is, as long as there is somebody like the FDA to point out, hey, you need to check this, you need to look at that, we have the ability to update that software fairly quickly. I mean, sometimes within a day or 2 days, that I think that it's just, just very wonderful, just what we're able to accomplish with, these wearables and all this technology.
Right.
Let me add one thing to this, 'cause I think this is a very, very important distinction, a very important point, because the panelists are saying the right things, but I want to make sure that it's really, really clear. When we look at the FDA and what their approval is for, it is primarily to regulate and look at devices that are going to be used by a medical professional to make some type of determination on care. So as he described, if someone comes up with a wearable or an app or a solution and they go direct to consumer, it is the consumer at risk, because a medical provider is not going to risk malpractice to rely on any readings from that mobile app or that sensor or that wearable that you might be using at your convenience. So the FDA's line in the sand is really where the market is selling services or devices or software that are intending to be used by the medical provider to gauge and deliver clinical care. So if, as he described, you can circumvent, you absolutely can. If anyone ever gone to, I think it's GNC, has anyone ever went to GNC and bought some vitamins or something like that, and you read the label and it says not supported by the FDA or not administered by the FDA, that means that the FDA's hands off. You're a consumer, you're at risk. If you buy it and use it and you have a good experience, if you have a bad experience, that's your decision as a consumer. So the same kind of thing happens. So when Apple comes out and they say, oh, I got this iHeart Rhythmia smartwatch, which is really kind of cool, but if it works great, that's great. If it doesn't work and deal with your condition, you're at risk. It's not an FDA-approved device. It's not supported from a medical perspective. So I just want to clarify that what the FDA's intent is around its regulation is if that you're using that device, you're using that data, using that information with the intent of a medical provider using it for care and treatment. That should be regulated.
Right, exactly. Really the FDA's whole focus is to sort out the low risk and the high risk devices, whether it's software or hardware, collecting information. So let's kind of move on to some of the things that fall under digital health and the value that they bring. We all know, we've heard the terms digital health, telehealth, remote monitoring. All of these things really roll up under digital health. So mobile apps are everywhere, right? So now that we're in a time that digital health is really a big focus, we need to really kind of dive into each one of these and the benefits that they bring, and maybe even some of the controversy that surrounds them. So Ralph, I'm going to let you kind of talk about why digital health has become such a big focus of the FDA and of consumers.
Sure. I think digital health, quite frankly and easily said, is really a couple of categories. You got the wearable category, which is more consumer-facing, and the data you get from your wearables or smartwatches and smartphones, it is very helpful to you as a person to understand basics about your health. Where we're starting to see a whole lot of adoption and interest is when Medicare approved remote patient monitoring as a fee-for-service line item this year. And the big deal there is now all of a sudden this type of tool of digital health where you can take data and monitor information from patients, that is now a reimbursable event for doctors. Well, they like that. It's also a recognition by Medicare that these types of tools and technologies are an acceptable standard of care. So there's less of a concern around a malpractice. And so all of a sudden, this data that you can get from your patient now can help you deliver quality of care better, more personalized care, but most importantly, and I'll wrap it up with 2 words, proactive intervention. For the first time, now your doctor can proactively intervene with you, and if you're hypertensive, if you have a cardiorhythmia, if you have some scenario with diabetes, you can now get a call from your medical office or your practitioner before you have an event. And that's a real big plus for people that have a challenge managing conditions.
Right. So let's just take that one step further and really dive into remote patient monitoring specifically. We're going to get into some of the other things like wearables and devices that we use in the clinic for patients driving their care. But let's just take a minute and talk about remote monitoring and the advantages of collecting that physiological data and setting care plans for patients that really drive improved outcomes.
So remote monitoring is a very important element that is now getting adoption because of the reimbursement by Medicare. What we're seeing in the market is providers are using it for proactive intervention, but now the data being collected at the home of the person is now becoming more convenient and simple. And so there are devices now that you can use to monitor your blood pressure, your weight, blood sugar levels, and that data can be taken in some cases passively, in some cases actively. But the data can now be taken from your home and electronically shared with your doctor, using your smartphone as a gateway to get the data. And so some of these devices now are Bluetooth enabled, just like you get into your car and you pair your phone to your radio and you can have your music. Same thing with your blood pressure cuff, your weight scale. And so with congestive heart failure patients or those populations, diabetic populations, you see a lot of these individuals using devices. You probably saw recently from, I think it's Dexcom has a new device coming out with Apple where they're now going to have their continuous glucose readings sent directly to the Apple smartwatch. Well, if you're a person living with diabetes and you're taking finger pricks to check your blood sugar, all of a sudden you just got a very, very simple passive way to monitor your health where that data can be stored on your smartwatch and shared with your doctor over time. So the technology is there, it's starting to evolve, the convenience factor is happening, and that data is being used by your medical doctors for proactive intervention. It will make it to the EMR. A lot of times they can't be reimbursed if it isn't. So you having the data in your home is great and you can use it, but they need it in the EMR so they can be medically reimbursed, but also use their tools and algorithms around quality of care opportunities.
Thank you. So what about portable devices in an outpatient clinic? Jim, can you shed some light on that?
Sure, thanks. So we all think of digital health in terms of the monitoring of physiological data. That's where the focus is. But this is about challenges with telehealth. And so there's the technology change and paradigm changes to keep up with. So you may take this down the road a step further with technology changes and say, hey, now we want to treat the patient remotely, not just monitor them. It could be a device that delivers insulin or delivers a drug device. It could be a therapeutic device that the patient has at their home that the doctor sends through his telehealth system directions to set up the machine, or it sets the parameters of the machine. It could be a tablet at a doctor's office that ties to a therapy device, and he calls up the patient's name, and that patient the tablet customizes the setting for that patient, and they get transmitted to the machine automatically, so the therapist doesn't have to think about it. They walk in, and they can automatically treat the patient with the right settings. So these are things that are gray areas in terms of the FDA. We all think of physiological monitoring, but there's a two-way system, and that broadcasting of treatment data out to affect the patient is really important, and this will become more and more prevalent as the technology catches up. So it's an area that we really need to think about, and the FDA will need to think about, because certainly the technology is there to accomplish this today.
Right, thank you. All the more need to have experts on the FDA's panel so that we can really grow with the FDA, so that setting these regulatory measures are all-encompassing, even though they are very fluid. So let's talk a little bit about mobile apps. I'm sure all of you have many apps on your phone. Specifically today, we want to talk about healthcare and the use of apps. And I think, Damien, you have a lot of experience in that field, so let's turn it over to you to at least share with us maybe a little bit about creating mobile apps in healthcare, their security, whether they're high risk, low risk, and how they communicate with the provider.
Yeah, so no, I think it's wonderful that the FDA kind of let the low risk, they kind of backed off a little bit because just personal experience, with an app, we have the ability to reach the masses. So we can engage people more, you can educate people more, and offer support 24/7. And for the providers, basically it helps the providers to identify high risk versus low risk in certain situations, like just from experience with people that are more high risk, we can help funnel them into a certain type of treatment if that's needed. And again, more contact. I mean, the average visit to the physician is, I don't know, what, 15 minutes, say. They can now look back a week and see what's going on and, keep in contact looking forward as well. So it helps them to kind of just see it more of a big picture, not just the 15 minutes that they're in the room for. And as far as patients, I think, just the engagement always with constant contact. You can always reach out to them. Encouragement and accountability. I think accountability is a really big one. And a lot of people, they might not see their physician for 6 months, and they'll, stop taking meds, forget, and wearable tech, all this stuff helps them. So, especially for the low risk, if they reach out and say, hey, it doesn't look like you took so-and-so medication that you're supposed to. And, oh, thank you so much. It encourages them. They feel somebody actually cares, and they get back on track. So I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Right. And I think the question always comes up that our Medicare age population is not real tech savvy, and can they use a mobile app or a smartphone? I'm going to tell you yes. My grandmother's 98, and she knows how to use her iPhone better than I do. So I think that we just need to make sure that as we are bringing patients into this type of environment, that we educate them on how to use the technology that's in front of them to better their care. So let's make another shift and really talk about some opportunities that the FDA has. Eloy, I'm going to ask you maybe to talk a little bit about the FDA's incubator program, if you can.
Yeah, for sure. So right now the FDA has an incubator program, and just real quick, by a show of hands, how many people here actually have implemented some form of digital health in their company? Alrighty, and how many individuals here are actually looking to integrate some form of digital health as a form of access to patients? Gotcha. So the incubator program is actually something that's going to be extremely helpful for you if it's the right solution for how to move forward for your business, right? So the pre-approval program with the FDA to try to get your product approved on market is still fairly long and strenuous, right? You're not going to get a solution at least within 6-8 months, realistically. I'm a realist, guys, so I'm sorry if something I says doesn't jive well. But you're just not going to get that approval that quickly. The incubator program is a way that the FDA is trying to remediate that issue. They're trying to shorten that wait period. They're trying to help get products on market, but again, they want to do their due diligence and make sure that what we are bringing to the market is something of value to the patients, for security of the patients and all that. So that could be the right option for you. Something I hinted on and was actually commented back on, which I appreciate, is a lot of businesses choose to circumvent the FDA, go internationally, maybe say that I have CQC approval, and that's how they generate their initial forms of revenue as they wait to get FDA approval. And again, that's a business strategy. It's extremely high risk. There are not many ways to reduce that risk, but if you are maybe a maintenance or a wellness care digital healthcare app, it may be a solution for you. So there are lots of different ways that we can start to address the population and move forward. Some are high risk, some I wouldn't recommend, but people still go forward with. And some are a little bit more strenuous and time consuming, as much as we try to utilize and make it a lot shorter of a process. So with that, those are really great questions that I think all 5 of us would love to answer if you have questions specific to your companies or where you see digital healthcare moving forward. So.
Thank you. So the use of technology such as smartphones, internet, mobile apps, and social networks are changing how we interact with each other. We have innovative ways to monitor health, Together, these advances are leading to improved health care and improved outcomes. The FDA regulations will help support and guide the future of digital health. Thank you. Please ask any questions of the panelists that you may have. Yes, go ahead.
Do you find differences and challenges from like state to state laws that are set up through digital healthcare versus, quote unquote, giving information to a broad nation?
Yeah, I'll just answer quick and then let the panel answer as well. There really are no differences state to state as far as the regulations or the law, if you will, but there are reimbursement differences. So when we look at implementing certain things in the Midwest or on the East Coast or the West Coast, most certainly you have to look at the payers to determine whether that's going to be a feasible alternative for that hospital or that healthcare provider.
I have nothing to add on that. Nothing to add. Next question.
Oh.
I'll let you guys answer that.
Get a microphone.
What I was wondering about is when you're designing your software applications, things like that, in medical device we follow 62304, IEC, and I was wondering if your apps are, if you're following those guidelines and requirements, or is there another type of regulatory procedure that you follow?
I'll address that question. So I think some companies follow it, and certainly some entrepreneurs or inventors don't necessarily follow that. They may not be familiar with the regulations that they want to follow, or the regulations may not be clear for the particular thing that they're developing or they're writing. So it's still a gray area. I think a larger company with well-trained engineers and a good QMS system would follow the regulations as they see fit. But I think on the entrepreneurial side, on the inventor side, I don't necessarily think that's the case, and it becomes more of a question for them to learn and experience as they get down the road to launch. You can go down the street and find 100 app developers and say, hey, I need an app that will do this, and they'll develop it, and they may have never done a medical product and have no clue.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Charles Senesi from Switzerland, and I do lots of NGO work, but officially I work for the Swiss regulatory agency, the Swiss Medic. And digital health is something that's really captivating Switzerland at the moment, especially Swiss Medic. And I want to get some opinion from the FDA. We work bilaterally, we are not in the EU. But one of the pushbacks that we seem to be getting is from certain segment of the population, which says, what if their aggregated data from the digital health falls in the wrong hands? What are some of the preventive strategies that you could share with us, if you could? Thank you.
Answer the question one more time. Make sure I heard. Just say it one more time, please. Security.
Basically, security of the data that's been aggregated from the patients through the use of the digital health is what I'm asking.
Gotcha. So what? One way we address it is to not use it. What I mean by that, any data that actually identifies the patient, we don't use it in the sharing of the data over the internet, through the app, into the cloud. It's all an algorithm that only the device that patient is using is what we use to understand who the data is coming from. So, for example, if we give a blood pressure cuff to John Smith, we have a ID on that blood pressure cuff. If John Smith sends us data, what we use is the ID of the device, not anything that relates to John Smith. So we try to protect data by not giving any personal information about that particular person on any transmissions that we use. That's one way. There's some other ways that you can protect the data on your cloud through cybersecurity protections. In the U.S., there's a group called HITRUST. You guys are probably familiar with it. That is a governing body that basically sets in place different architectural, cybersecurity, HIPAA, and standards around protecting data. It's a laborious process, but if you go through that process, it helps you to secure bigger contracts or bigger opportunities with larger companies, because that means you've done the gamut. It's almost like an FDA approval, but for cybersecurity protection. But I think one of the ways that, at least we have seen it here in the United States, is to not use any identifiable data with any kind of transmission.
Right.
Does that answer your question? Doctor, does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, is there another one?
Oh, hi. I had a related question. We talk about mobile apps, and there are a lot of apps that are driven by the provider that the consumer, the patient would use. There are a lot of apps that are healthcare related, but more wellness, kind of healthcare adjacent, that are driven a lot by entrepreneurs and the consumerization of healthcare and wellness. How does HIPAA apply for those apps where, let's say I'm the consumer, I'm self-reporting my wellness data, which may also can be medical data, and then where does the line get drawn, like how that can be shared and who owns it and who's responsible
This
for
is
it?
the fun one. I love this question. I'll let these guys jump in there. The fun one on this is if it's considered a consumer app and you, the person, are sending the data, there's no HIPAA protection for you as a consumer. If you send that data to your sister, your brother who's a doctor or a clinician, there's no protection for you, because it's not a medical doctor you're engaged in, and that medical doctor's not engaging you. You're sending something to them. There's no protection under the HIPAA Act for you. Now, if I'm the doctor and I'm sending you something, I'm saying, send this to me, then I'm accountable to make sure that communication is private and secure, and I'm at risk. But if you decide to give the data to your sister, who puts it on the fax machine at work and scans it and forgets it and leaves all your stuff out, that's on you.
Just as an entrepreneur doing that, I think it's really important to surround yourself with people that know, like a board, for example. With what we're doing, I didn't know at first that 3 forms of identification, which we don't ask for anything but your phone number, but then we allow people to upload a photo and just, their location if they choose to use it. You actually need to do stuff for that that's more HIPAA compliant. I didn't know that at first until I surrounded myself with people that could help. And we actually just brought a gentleman on that his company is all based around owning your own data, and you choose what you do with it, and you can choose to share it or not share it. So he's a blockchain company, and he's going to help integrate into our company for further protection. So I think as an entrepreneur, we need to probably a lot more education on stuff like that. And it's great because I've actually learned a heck of a lot in the past 2 weeks just discussing with everybody. But it's who you surround yourself with, and how much do you care about your user base? If
there are small businesses or entrepreneurs here that are really looking to get started in healthcare technologies or healthcare mobile apps, I would strongly suggest you begin to work with an incubator group. Back to Damien's point, get a board of advisors around you that have a healthcare background and experience. There are so many things in healthcare that you need to be aware of, that if you don't know what you don't know. You may have a great idea, but it will fall down and fail. The one word I will tell you is kind of a true story. Medical doctors that I've worked with, they view the word innovation as failure. That's how they view that word, failure. They view that word as risk. They view that word as, I don't want any part of it. And so when you approach any kind of medical group with your new solution, first thing they think of a malpractice and risk. And if you can't mitigate that through some experiences, they're not even going to hear your story. So any small business, entrepreneurs, great ideas out there, I'm not a dream killer. I'm just telling you, partner with the right board, partner with the right medical group to help support you. And I think Damien's point is spot on. You got to you got to learn things you don't know. And it's a lot to it. It's not an easy industry to jump into.
That was actually
Thank you.